There are a few root causes of knee pain that people often miss, weak and tight hamstrings being one. But simple stretches and leg curls won't address all the ways the hamstrings might be dysfunctional. Watch this video for full details and 5 exercises to get your hamstrings working right. Hey, it's Coach E, kinesiologist and founder of Precision Movement, and today I'm going to talk about the hamstrings and how this muscle group can contribute to your knee pain. Now, it's not the only way that you can get painful knees, but it's one of the ones that's most overlooked and often overlooked. So if you like getting to the actual root causes of problems, make sure you hit that subscribe button because that's what we do here. And we've recently hit 400,000 subscribers, which is pretty cool. And if you're not subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join those who have come before you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now, the hamstrings, before we get into the reasons why, let's talk about the basic actions of the hamstrings. And there's a few that you might not have heard before. So the first one listed up here, knee flexion. That's just bending the knee like that. That's knee flexion. This is the most commonly known function of the hamstrings, so you probably know that one. Hip extension. So hip extension, and I wrote in brackets there, weak. It's very weak in hip extension. It should not contribute to hip extension. So if this is the pelvis, it's extending the leg back behind you that way. That's called hip extension. The glutes should be doing most of the hip extension. Next up, right here, what do we got? We got tibial. Can you guess? IR and ER. Internal and external rotation. So that looks like this. When your knee is bent, the tibia rotates that way, that's external, or this way, that's internal. So this is the tibia bone. So the hamstrings, again, external rotation, that's going to be more your outer or lateral hamstrings, and then internal rotation, that's more your medial hamstrings. So you can hit specific aspects of the hamstrings through that movement, and we're going to do that with an exercise, one of our exercises today. And finally, this is one that you might not have heard of before with respect to hamstring function. It's posterior pelvic tilt. So you may have heard of that term before in that movement. That's if I had a tail and I tucked that tail between my legs, the hamstrings would be contributing to that movement because they insert down on the lower leg here and they originate up on the pelvis. So when they contract and my lower leg's not moving, they'll pull the pelvis down and tuck that tail between your legs like that. So posterior pelvic tilt, that's one that is not often talked about or mentioned with respect to the hamstrings, and it's an important one. And we're going to get to an exercise that will train that function specifically. Now, functional anatomy, this is looking at not just basic actions of the hamstrings, but how do the hamstrings function when you're doing tasks of everyday life or in sport. The first one here, the hamstrings, I've wrote, equal the ACL. The ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, very important ligament for knee stability. The ACL runs inside the knee, and what it does is it prevents the tibia, the lower leg, from sliding forward on the femur. The hamstrings, because of where they run from here up to the pelvis over here, they also prevent the tibia, the lower leg, from sliding forward on the femur. It's anterior translation of the tibia on the femur. If the hamstrings are not strong, if they're not able to contract at the right time, they're not going to provide that active restraint, that active support for the knee, and then the ACL will take more stress, and that's when we can run into ACL tears. Now, a lot of times people tear their ACL, soccer players, basketball players, they'll tear their ACLs and they'll think, oh, it was just one move that I did. But usually it's a result of repetitive stress on that ACL and it wears out over time. And one reason why the ACL might be taking all that repetitive stress is because the hamstrings aren't doing their job in supporting the knee and preventing that anterior translation of the tibia on the femur. So that's an important one, especially for you athletes involved in running and cutting sports. You need good, strong hamstrings that can contract when they're supposed to contract. So that's one function of the hamstring outside of these basic movements. And then number 2, these are quizzes, fill in the blanks here. We've got rotational knee stability. And This function in particular protects the meniscus. Again, the basic function movement of the hamstrings, or that the hamstrings create, is this tibial internal and external rotation. Now, if they're working properly, they can contract, and if the tibia rotates, let's say you plant your foot and you make a cut, you're making a cutting movement, and you are controlling that with the hamstrings, that's going to prevent the meniscus inside of the knee joint from taking excessive stress, because we've got that active constraint, so we don't have to get into the passive tissues to stabilize or support that joint. So it's a very, very important muscle group and a very important function of the hamstrings to protect the meniscus. That function also protects the ACL and the PCL. So the hamstrings, they're much more than just knee flexors, much more than just bending the knee, much more than hip extension. They do all of these functions, and all of these functions serve to protect that knee joint and keep it healthy. Now that you understand these functions and this background of the hamstrings, the 5 exercises that we go through will make more sense. The 5 exercises that we're going to do are going to improve the strength, improve the length, the range of motion of the hamstrings. We'll improve tissue quality, their ability to activate. We'll basically hit all of these different functions of the hamstrings that will make sure that the hamstrings can do all of the things that it's designed to do. So we're going to get into the exercise right now. Don't worry about reps and sets as I demonstrate the exercises. Just follow along, and what's most important is to get the cues, the proper technical cues and the form down. We'll talk about the reps and sets at the end of this video, summarize it in a table so it's easy to follow afterwards. The first exercise to fix your weak and or tight hamstrings is active self-myofascial release for the hamstrings, ASMR. For this, you'll need a massage ball or a golf ball, something pretty hard, because the muscles, you can really dig in and get deep into these muscles, and you need a harder ball to do that. When you do it, you're going to want to work about 8 different spots, basically from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down on the back of your thigh there. You sit on a fairly firm surface and pick your first area. And when you get on that ball, it might be a little bit uncomfortable and might make you tense up a little bit. So just breathe and relax those hamstrings over the ball. And once you're relaxed, all you're doing is fully extending your knee, fire those quads at the end range, and then bring it down. Do that 2 to 3 times on each area and work those hamstrings. Now you could do more if you're really tall or you've got super long legs, but work those different areas, trying to get all the way from the top to the bottom of the muscle to release any adhesions or restrictions that might be there. And this is going to improve the tissue quality of the hamstrings, release any knots that might be there to allow them to lengthen. So if they're tight, this will allow them to lengthen properly. Now, if you've got any sciatica type problems, then one thing you can do that will allow you to get to full knee extension, because we want to really lengthen out that hamstring to make sure it has full extensibility and full pliability. When you extend the knee, point the toe a little bit, and that'll just take off some of that stress, decrease the stretch on the sciatic nerve, so you can do this technique without flaring up the sciatic nerve. Once you've improved your tissue quality and pliability, then it's time to lengthen and activate those muscles in the lengthened range of motion. That's how you're going to build range of motion that lasts and length that lasts. Sounds like a Viagra commercial. But if you're just doing static stretching, you're pulling on the muscle, but it's not getting stronger. So your neuromuscular system, your brain, is going to quickly think, I don't have strength there. That's not a stable thing for the knee joint. I'm just going to contract things and tighten it up again to at least maintain that stability. Your brain would much rather have stability of a joint over length of a muscle. So for this technique, we're doing the hamstring end range expansion technique, ERE, similar to PNF stretching techniques. We're going to start off in the standing position, and then I'm going to talk about a variation you could do if you find this one really difficult, your quads cramp up a lot. So for this one, you're sticking your foot up on a stool or a chair or something stable, and you want to settle your pelvis down towards the floor. So it's not hiked up and you're not side bending through the spine. So you settle that pelvis down towards the floor, hang out there a little bit, and make sure your support leg is nice and straight and stable and strong. Keep good posture. And once you feel like you're in good alignment with this knee being straight, you're going to contract the quads, contract the hip flexors, and just lift the foot off whatever it is you're on. And keep trying to get deeper into that range. Strength. Really contract the hip flexors and quads for 10 to 15 seconds. Breathe naturally. Maintain good posture. And then slowly place it down on the stool. Next, you're going to contract the hamstrings. So how we're going to do that is push the heel into the stool, but also think of flexing the knee. So bending the knee like I'm trying to drag that stool towards me. So fire those hamstrings up. Again, holding for about 10 to 15 seconds. Try to gradually ramp up and ramp down the contractions that we're doing here, so you don't surprise your muscles and then they tweak them. So 10 to 15 seconds, you're breathing naturally, maintaining your form and your posture. And we're going to end with another lift off. So support leg is straight, good alignment, good posture, contract the quads and hip flexors, lift the heel off as high as you can and keep trying to get higher and higher, even though you're not moving. That's going to maximally activate those muscles. Hold for 10 to 15 seconds, and then you can slowly lower down to the ground and relax. And that's one cycle of the hamstring ERE technique. What we're doing here is we're strengthening the muscles that bring you into this range of motion, that lengthen the hamstrings, and we're strengthening the hamstrings at that end range of motion. So we're getting strength in both of those muscle groups, the main muscle groups that bring you into and out of that hip flex position where the hamstrings are the longest. And that's how we're going to build range of motion that lasts. Now, if you find that really difficult, what you can do is use a door frame at home. And you're just lying down on the ground with your foot up on the door frame as opposed to on the stool. And you do the same technique there. This is just a little bit easier because you're not fighting gravity as much. The third exercise is the marching hip bridge. And the reason why we're doing the marching hip bridge is to strengthen the glutes and get the glutes activated so that the hamstrings don't feel like they need to compensate for weak glutes. Like I said in the intro, the hamstrings contribute to the movement of hip extension, but they're very weak. But if the glutes aren't working properly, your brain will try to get something else, some other muscle group to contribute, and the hamstrings are next in line. So they're going to do this job of hip extension, but they're not well suited to it. So it's going to cause them to quickly get overworked, just like if you did 1,000 bicep curls in a workout, the next day you're going to be sore. But if you do that every day without relenting on it, then the hamstrings are chronically becoming overworked, and then they become really taut and tense. So by getting the glutes working, we can indirectly influence the length and the tone of the hamstrings. For this technique, you could do a standard hip bridge, but I'm just going to show you the marching version. And whenever I'm on the ground, I like to train good posture. So get those shoulders back. Chest is out in good alignment. The more that we can train good alignment, the easier it will be for us to stick. So even if we're not training the shoulders, we can work this good postural alignment. Feet are flat on the ground, and I like to get the active arch going. So the short and skinny foot, I talk about this in the foot intrinsics video that we have here on YouTube, but get that active arch going. From here, the first activation is of the deep pelvic floor muscles. So if you can imagine you're peeing and you're stopping your pee midstream, those are the pelvic floor muscles. You contract that, then you contract the glutes, then you lift up to the point where you're not hyperextending your spine, you're in a neutral lumbar spine, and you've got the glutes working. So this one, we're not prioritizing the hamstrings. So what we want to make sure is the hamstrings aren't overworking here, and we've got good glute activation. If you find your hamstrings are working too much, just think of extending your knee like you're sliding your feet down that way to activate the quads a little bit, and that can help to shut the hamstrings off. You still maintain the pelvic floor and the glutes. Keep the glutes on, the pelvic floor on as you go down, and then relax everything once you're on the ground. So that's just the basic hip bridge. Now, the marching hip bridge is the same. Start, so feet, pelvic floor, glutes. I've got a natural lumbar curve here under my low back. I could fit my hand under my low back there, just barely. And then I lift up, maintaining that natural lumbar curve, making sure my glutes are working, my hamstrings are as quiet as possible. And then marching is just lift one up, slowly, soft landing. Lift the other up, slowly, soft landing. Keeping the glutes on, the pelvic floor on, all the way to the ground. And once you're on the ground, gradually ramp down the muscle contractions. One more time, feet, floor, glutes, natural lumbar curve, slowly bridge up, pushing the floor that way to get the quads on more and the hamstrings on less. Up there, once I'm up, pelvis is level, I'm breathing naturally. Lift one foot up, maintaining activation, keeping the pelvis up, other foot up, and both feet on the ground, keep everything on all the way to the ground, land with a natural lumbar curve, and let everything go. That's the marching hip bridge. If you find that really difficult, just stick with the basic hip bridge. But if you're okay with the basic hip bridge, this allows us to get a little more strength required to hold up on one foot. And I like that switching from back on to off, on to off. So that's training that contraction relaxation that is very transferable to things like running, to anything that you do on your feet. So the marching hip bridge is a great exercise to get those glutes fired up and stronger so that the hamstrings can relax for that hip extension movement. The first three exercises really worked on hamstring activation, ensuring tissue quality, and making sure that we have full length of the hamstrings. So they're not taut and they're not restricting our movement and adding tension and stress and force to the knees unnecessarily. The fourth exercise is the seated tibial rotation. And this is working the rotational function at the knee joint of the hamstrings. And again, this is important for maintaining rotational stability at the knee to protect the meniscus and the ligaments like the ACL and the PCL. For this technique, you sit on something stable. Knees are approximately 90 degrees, and I'm gonna lift my heels just off the ground, and I'll push both heels out like I'm pivoting on the ball of my foot, and I'm trying to really push both heels out, and I'm thinking of medial hamstrings here. This is the movement of tibial internal rotation, and the medial hamstrings, the inside hamstrings, are the ones contributing more to this. Then after about 5 seconds, I'm gonna rotate the heels in towards each other, and I'm thinking lateral hamstrings here. I'm trying to get deeper into this range, keeping my heels just off the ground like I could slide a piece of paper underneath them, and that's it for about 5 seconds, and then back to internal tibial rotation. Trying to get deeper into the range, that's important. Don't just get there and then relax and hang out, but I'm trying to get deeper into that range, force those heels out more, activate the hamstrings more. Now, if you don't feel your hamstrings on this, one little tip is think of dragging the floor towards you, like you're trying to flex your knees, bend your knees more. That'll fire up those hamstrings. You might be able to feel them, prod them a little bit, make sure they're on, and then switch directions. The knees should stay in place. They're not going closer or farther apart. Here I'm working the lateral hamstrings for this tibial external rotation. And again, I can drag the floor towards me to further activate the hammies. Let's go back and forth, focusing on those cues, and you're gonna work that tibial rotation function of the hamstrings to maintain rotational stability at the knee when you're out on the fields, on the tennis court, doing your thing, and you need that to protect the meniscus and the ligaments. The fifth and final exercise we're covering today is called the Jefferson Curl. And this exercise works the hamstrings in the closed chain fashion where our feet are stuck to the ground, they're not moving, and our upper body is moving around the stable lower body. And it's gonna work the posterior pelvic tilt function of the hamstrings. And this is really beneficial for helping you to increase your kinesthetic awareness of when the hamstrings are contracting and their influence on the position of the pelvis. Start off with your feet about shoulder width apart. Stand nice and tall. And what you're doing is you're bringing your chin to your chest and then flexing your spine segment by segment. And we're keeping our knees straight the whole time. So segment by segment, then I'm going down, and this is where my pelvis is tilting anteriorly. It's dumping forward. And I go as far as I can go with straight knees. Then I'm coming up, thinking of the hamstrings contracting, pulling the pelvis posteriorly first, pulling it under to a neutral position, and then coming up segment by segment, stacking the spine nicely in good alignment, ending off in really good posture and alignment. That's the Jefferson curl. Now, if you have low back pain, specifically the type where sitting really bothers your back, or you tweaked it just bending over to pick up something light off the floor, then you'll want to avoid all this flexion of the spine. And we've got a video, we'll link it in the description down below, on low back pain and how you can effectively deal with that if you are. So if you do have low back pain, instead of flexing the spine and doing the Jefferson curl, you can do a simple hip hinge. For this, I would recommend you bend your knees, keep the spine neutral, and you're just hinging at the hips, lengthening the hamstrings, and same thing, thinking of using the hamstrings to pull you up in addition to the glutes, and repeating, hinging over, lengthening the hamstrings, standing back up, contracting the hamstrings. Here you're just maintaining neutral of the lumbar spine, which is going to protect the low back and the discs that might be affected from whatever it is that you do in your life that tweaks your back. So those are the 5 exercises to help you to fix weak and tight hamstrings that could be contributing to painful knees. To summarize the exercises and give you reps and sets to do, ASMR hamstrings do on 8 to 10 different areas, 2 to 3 extensions in each area. The supine hamstring ERE is done for 2 to 4 cycles per side, holding each activation for 10 to 15 seconds. There are 3 activations. The marching hip bridge should be done for 2 to 3 sets, times 5 to 8 reps. The seated tibial rotation due for 2 to 3 sets of 4 to 6 reps, 5-second holds on internal and external rotation. And finally, the Jefferson curl or the hip hinge, perform for 2 to 4 sets of 3 to 5 repetitions. Do this routine 2 to 3 times a week for 4 weeks, and I bet you'll be finding your hamstrings are stronger, are longer, and your knees might feel a little bit better. If you want a really easy way to follow these exercises, I suggest you get our ROM Coach app, which is a free download, and you can just go into the library and search for hamstrings, and you'll find the tight hamstrings 1 and tight hamstrings 2 routines. And all you have to do is add it to your calendar, schedule it on the days that you want to do it. You'll get notifications. And as you work through the routines, the sets and the reps will be progressed to ensure that your body continues to adapt, so you don't hit a plateau, you don't get stagnant. So download the ROM Coach app. It's available for Apple iPhones and on Google Play. Now we've got a couple other videos that could help you if you've got sore, achy, painful knees. One up here on the intrinsic foot muscles. Poor feet function can contribute to knee pain. One up here for ankle dorsiflexion range of motion. Lacking that can definitely contribute to knee pain. And again, get the ROM Coach app. This is something that is going to be your companion for the rest of your life if you want to keep moving pain-free.